the controller is not found. So you need to remember to, because we are not installing the newsletter using Composer, we need to explicitly create a namespace entry for it in our application composer.json file. And then Composer down by the load, so the controllers and everything could be found. Was kind of tricky because it is a question that defaults to no. So if you just click enter, you will notice that. Cool. So let's go on. I'm not gonna stop here for too long. This is basically the standard CakePHP request. Keep in mind CakePHP uses the front controller design pattern. So we have a main entry point for all the application requests. That is webroot/index.php. It's a very simple file here. Okay, it's super simple file, this main entry point, and basically what it does is this create a request based on the HTTP request we have or from the globals, and create an empty response and dispatch it. The dispatch process will handle the reading of the config files, the app.php, the bootstrap, anything else that is needed or that is referred from those config files. Then parsing the route based on the input URL, we were going to generate a set of request parameters, like the controller, the action, etc. Then we're gonna load and initialize the controller. The controller also has some magic inside, like getting an instance of the table with the same name if available. So, well, all these steps, once we have the controller initialized, we will run the specific action match by the router. And, well, the action will do something that usually involves accessing the database, reading, writing data, anything else, and then configuring the response object and returning the response object. Then the framework will handle the response object and generate an HTTP response and send it back to the browser. So if we get into the model layer as an introduction, this is what we're going to cover in the morning. Quick introduction in the model layer. I will try to be quick here because we are a little bit tight on time. And I understand also in the afternoon, Jose is going to give you a more deep introduction and concepts on the model layer itself. So the model layer is where the business logic of our application resides. We have several different classes. The table, basically the table, the entity, and the query builder. The query builder is one of the changes on the CakePHP 3 ORM. We have a way to build queries. The queries are going to be lazy executed, so we're going to delay the execution of the query as much as possible, because maybe some other parts of the application are going to modify this query. So this query, the callbacks, in effect, could also modify the query as well. And once we are done with all the modifications, we can run the query itself and return the results. The results are going to be retrieved as objects. The entity is an object, not an array. And well, we will have the logic associated to the tables and the entities. Basically, to the table, we have associations, validation, and callbacks. Talking about the tables, we can use the initialize. Well, I think it's better to show you one table campaigns. Like this. Hello, welcome. Let's go in. The campaigns table has an initialize. Well, we extend the CakeORM table we have an initialize method where we do all the required initialization and configuration for the table. Like, for example, the table name, the database table that matches this table in the database. The field we're going to use for displaying in when retrieving lists, the primary key, the behaviors we're going to attach. We're going to build a behavior today, hopefully, and attach it to some tables, a log behavior. Then the associations, there is a method to define each association, like belongs to, has many, and belongs to many. And then here are the properties we can use to configure how the associations are defined. Then we have a method for validating the entities, that is validation default. We could create additional validation methods and configure which one we want to use when we build the entity in different situations. And then we have the build rules method that we're going to use to validate the business rules before we save this entity to the database. This is separated in two different methods. Usually the entity validation or the validation default method will handle isolated validation in the entity itself. You will validate things like this is an email, or the length of the password should be 8 characters at least, things like that. And then we have the build rules that will ensure that the whole application validates the saving of this new entity. For example, you could define a rule that says a user can only be assigned to 5 mailing lists. So if you try to assign a user to the 6th mailing list, it will fail and say, sorry, one user can only be assigned to 5. One bronze membership user can only be assigned to 5 mailing lists, something like that. Okay? So, tables. This is as an example. Because it's pretty simple. I'm gonna just pass through it. The example was about changing the way we display the emails. I'm not gonna let you do it. I'm just passing through it. But basically, keep in mind that the display field that we use will be taken into consideration when we get the list of elements to populate a drop-down. So when you get, well, I'm not gonna pass through it. I'm just gonna explain. Sorry. So if we get here and we try to edit this newsletter, well, better with the mailing list. For the mailing list, if we edit the mailing list, we see the users here will be listed. The finder we are using for retrieving all this information is using a find list. The list will populate an array with the ID and the display field of the table. In this case, because there is no column name, title, or name in that table, that they would pick it magically and define it as the display field for that table. We have no display field, and the default fallback is ID, which is odd because I don't know how to identify a user this way. So maybe it's better if we go here and change the display field for the users table . We change the display field to email, right? So now going back here and reloading, we'll see something like this. That could help us to identify a user more than the ID, because we don't know who is who. Okay, that's a quick example about the display field. Talking about the entities will allow us to modify and add logic to the row level representation, or to the row in the database. If we think about the ORM as a table, has many entities, and an entity belongs to a table. The table matches the database table. The entity matches the row in the database. we can split the logic we use and put some logic in the table. For example, the association logic, some callbacks, basically most of the logic would be in the table class. And then we can use the entity to use or to add there the logic that it references to the row itself. Some formatting logic, for example, some data that we need to fix, or little changes on date times, or well, things like that before we get the data from the database or save it. And there is also a way to define or to use the accessors and mutators in the entity to define virtual fields. And we're going to define a virtual field right now. And also there are two parameters that are important, specifically the accessible parameter, property. And this accessible will be used by the marshaler. When you create a new entity, there is an object in the framework that is the marshaler that will understand some array of data coming from a form, for example, and will build one or many objects as entities, as a representation of the data that is coming. If you're coming from Cake 2, you remember the save operation had a whitelist param that you should be using already. And the whitelist will allow you to only save the fields that you are expected to save. Because there are some fields that the user should not be touching, because those fields, for example, the IDs should not be coming from a form, because if you let a user change the ID of something, you can get into troubles, because the user could try to tamper data from another user or update records that are not of its own. So this is for the accessible, or this is the feature of accessible. You will let the framework know, hey, every time you create a new entity or patch an entity, please only use these fields and ignore the rest of the fields. For example, if you have a user application, if you have a user edit form and you have a role to set the role of the user, maybe it's good for you to put the role into the accessible false. So you will never let the user change his own role. Okay. Well, and then we have hidden that you can use, for example, to remove some fields in the entity when you are going to convert the entity to string or to JSON. Okay. For example, a password. Usually you don't want to print the password of the user, so you put the password there in the hidden property, and you ensure that when you do you convert the entity to JSON or to string, the password is not there. So this is, let's do this as an example. We're gonna use the getter of the user's entity, and we're gonna provide a better display name for the users. Okay? The objective of this example is, instead of displaying the email, we're gonna display the first, the last name, and email in brackets or something like that. Okay? I'll leave you 1 minute, and I'll start doing it. Raise a hand if you don't need how to start or you get stuck, and I can point you there. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to use a method in the user entity. So if you go to the user entity, that is here. Okay? Newsletter. Plugins, newsletter, source, model, entity, user is this tiny class that has almost nothing inside. So we want to use one feature of the entities, that is the getter, the accessors. to allow retrieve one virtual field, something that does not exist yet, but we want to compose with the rest of the data that is there in the entity. Okay, so we can do this way. I have an example here. So I need to type. Okay, so we are using, or we are creating a underscore get whatever accessor at the entity level, and we are returning the first name, the last name, brackets, and email. So this does not exist in the database, but we're gonna fake the rest of the application to think that it was in the database. So it is like a little help for the view, for the controller, for the view, when they try to render the content of the user. So now we have a get full name, email, so we can just go to the users table and change the display field. Okay? So instead of displaying the emails in the list, we're gonna display this new field we just created. In this case, the name would be full name email. Okay? So now if we get back to here, we should get that. That is better for taking a user. There are a number of, if you are coming from Cake 2, there are a number of places you use virtual fields. Virtual fields are not exactly entity getters because virtual fields also do things, injected code into the database, so it's not exactly the same thing. But you can use accessors to imitate some of the features in the virtual fields in Cake 2 and compose new, actually you can do anything here. I mean, if you like, or if you need the data, you could get a reference of another table here and call a query and return the result. When I mean, it's PHP code. You can do whatever you want there inside. So that's for the entities. And now, well, questions so far?
I have one question. It's regarding the business logic. So, for example, let's say I have a task to include, I don't know, 20 different database tables that are all together doing some logic. So I need to create some sort of business logic model where I would include all these classes and then say, okay, I need a user class, and I want to fetch these 20 users, and I want these newsletters, and then I need to compile that to compile that into a report, and then I send an email or in the session. So where would I put that in this type of?
Okay, thank you for the question. The question was related with what I should or where I should put my code if it is something that is related to different, or is a code that affects my application across several different tables, doing things on each table, like reading or saving data inside the same kind of method or transaction in this case. Well, the default answer for any question that starts with where should I put my code when whatever is the model layer. And then, if not the model layer, you should have a reason for not putting that in the model layer. Because all the business logic in your application should be in the model layer. Where would I put that specific feature? Well, depends on the feature. Because I would put it on a place where where I'm going to find it later. So, for example, imagine the compose operation in this plugin that is gonna read users, is gonna read templates, is gonna merge the templates, and then it's gonna send emails. It's going to do a lot of different things. I could think of this feature inside the campaigns table, because for me, it's like I'm sending a campaign. It doesn't matter if this method is accessing other tables across the application, reading or writing data in different tables, and then sending an email. But I would put it on the campaigns table, because that's kind of the place I envision for that feature. Yep.
This kind of features are also used in Progo for specific keywords for posts. And this we implemented in over events.
Mm-hmm.
This is also a way,
Yeah.
event-based.
Yeah, if you want to keep it outside of the model scope, you could have an event, fire an event, and let an event listener catch that event and do it. Or you could even create a kind of service class under a new folder service, and merger class. So you put all the merge feature into that merge class, and the merge class will be able to read across different tables and do different things. It's a matter of how you want to architecture the application, and the complexity of the following features you're planning to do. If you are planning to have a lot of related features, makes sense, for example, to put all these features into a behavior, or to put all these features into a service class, or just use a listener as a matter of catching all the related events and processing them. Depends. For me, it depends on the amount of changes I am expecting to this process. If I am expecting a lot of changes into this process, I will think about breaking into different, or delegate into different classes with single responsibility, if possible, and then using another service class to grab all of that features and call everything inside a transaction, for example.
Thanks.
Does that answer the question?
Yes. Oh, like one sub question. Is it a good practice to create model classes which do not necessarily have a database table? For example, we have a related content plugin,
Mhm.
which isn't really having any single database. It just calls another plugins and fetches the content for a specific.
Yeah, from a REST
so that-
service or whatever.
Yeah. So it's fine to, like, from the Cake PHP view, to use it in, let's say, in this context, to have a fake table model, like, which would
Totally.
be a table model without a table.
Totally, yes.
So that's fine, yeah.
So the question is, if it's possible to create a model that has no table in the database associated with it. And the answer is yes, totally. And it is also very useful to encapsulate external services or APIs, so you can access those APIs through that model that is a fake one, or even use a different database, not relational database, behind that table, so you can kind of fake an Elasticsearch backend or whatever that you need to use.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take a look at the Elasticsearch.
I don't know. I don't know if we have something like this in the Jose. Do you have this plan for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't use table classes.
Great. So, any other questions so far?
No.
Tables. Let's go through associations. This is basically a quick thing to cover. I understand you are already familiar with this, so unless you have specific questions, I just go quickly through it. There are several different association types we can define. We can use a specific method under the initialize method in the table class. And I think it's better that I show you directly the example. So like this. This is the way we can configure associations. In this case, campaigns belongs to table. The join type is inner here. Campaigns has many logs and belongs to many mailing lists. The belongs to many requires to configure the join table here as well. So Cake knows, well, if we don't do it, he will pick this join table by convention. But Bake already generates the properties, so we don't need to inspect that again and again. We just know that the join table is campaigns mailing lists, campaigns mailing lists, yeah. And also the class name for the object that we're gonna retrieve. So when we retrieve the data and we decide to contain the mailing lists, we will get inside mailing underscore lists property in the entity. We will have an array with newsletter.mailing lists classes. Okay? So the same for belongs to and has many. It's not exactly the same because in the case of belongs to and the case of has one, we will not retrieve an array. We will retrieve the specific entity with a singular name for it. So in this case, when we retrieve a campaign and contain templates, campaign will have a template attribute inside with a template, entity class. Okay, a template entity class. Make sense? Well, we'll see this later. And we can create custom associations as well. Usually, when you bake an application, Bake will detect kind of the default associations between the models. But depending on your application, you might be interested in defining specific custom associations because you're going to use them a lot of times. So you don't need to do that always on define and define the conditions or define the fields you want to retrieve. You can do it on a custom association as well. There are 3 examples. Let's pick one of them. I'll let you 1 minute and then I'll start writing as well. So for example, we are gonna pick the second one. And let's say we're going to add a custom association, new campaigns to the templates table. And we want to retrieve only the new campaigns. Make sense? Imagine that you have an application and you have a dashboard and you want to show the new campaigns on the left. You could write this as a query, like get me the new campaigns, or you could just get the templates contain campaigns, new campaigns, and get everything on the same query. Okay? So what the objective here with this example is to create a new association that says templates has many new campaigns, and the new campaigns are restricted by state equals new. Okay? Keep in mind, restricting can be done using the conditions configuration property in the association. Yeah, I'll leave you 5 seconds and start writing the solution.
Okay.
Okay. So we have an association already between templates and campaigns, and we want a new one. So, well, we create a new one. We can say new campaigns. Conditions. And say state equals new. Okay, so under new campaigns, I will only get the new campaigns. If there is a campaign that is completed, it will appear listed under campaigns, but it will not appear listed under new campaigns. Make sense? Well, actually, it's good to do this as well. Is status? Yeah, you're right. Again. Yep.
So you use this way over custom find methods.
Yeah. The question was if we use this instead of a custom find. Yes, it's the same. It's a way to configure how the association is retrieved. This way is the same as using contain and passing a callable to contain to filter the way the contain object is retrieved, or using a finder and adding a condition for retrieving this associated object. It's the same. It's just a way. It's just a place where you can put what kind of associations you want to retrieve. And I think it is very easy to, or is a good place if this is something you are going to use across several places in the application, because you don't have the code there split it somewhere. It is there in the table class, and you see, oh, this is an important association, and I'm going to use it a lot of places in a lot of places. Yep.
Did you now create two queries basically for the same thing? So when we find one template, basically it's going to fetch first find all campaigns, and then another MySQL query find all where, and then, which is from the point of optimization a little bit maybe slowing down, but.
Yeah, the question was from the point of optimization. Well, from an optimization point of view, it's done. I wouldn't do it. I won't do it this way. But it's just an example, because possibly when you're fetching a template, you will not fetch at the same time campaigns and new campaigns. You will pick one of those.
Yeah.
So in this case, it makes sense to have an association for it. But if you're planning to do it, obviously the most or the better way to do it is using just one query and then filtering the results as you get them. Okay. Yep.
I forgot one question. In this condition, can we also include more than one table? So these conditions are treated like find conditions, standard find conditions, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you need to do something complex there in the contained conditions, I would suggest to go to the finder and use a callable when you contain and configure that inside. Okay, so you could do subqueries or any other thing that you need to do there inside in the contain configuration for the.
So like function Q for query $Q query and then the subquery.
Just in the find operation.
Yes.
Okay. More questions?
Basically contain override conditions from
I understand it overrides as well. I understand, yes. I don't remember exactly. Anyone remembers? If you define a contain and you have an association, it overrides the contain defined there in the association?
No, it's always applied.
Always apply?
Yeah, it's composed, so
Okay, it does not
on top
override.
of the other.
It applies extra conditions to the association.
Thank you.
The fun of it. The fun of migrating. Okay, good. Any other questions? Well, that was just a quick example on you can do things on associations. You could order as the data. Oh, sorry.
Could we use a finder already defined in the campaigns table instead of explicitly writing the conditions? Yes.
Yeah. So the question was if we can use a finder already defined in the table, and the answer is yes. We can just put the finder there and it will be applied.
You mean it's private or protected, something like that? Okay.
Okay, let's go through validation quickly. We have 2 levels of validation. The validation that is done at the entity level and the validation that is done at the rules or business level. Keep in mind, one thing could not be valid at two different times in the execution of your code. So the simple or the entity validation is triggered when the entity is created, patched, or modified. The business validation is done on save. Obviously, when you're saving something, if the entity is not valid, you don't proceed to check the rules. You just stop and say, well, it's not valid. Okay? But keep in mind, you need to check the validation, or if you need, you will be checking validation twice. One for the entity or set of entities, and another for the validation rules or the business rules on the save operation. So let's talk about validation default or the entity validation. We can use all those functions, require presence, allow empty, not empty, add, and also the short format we have available. So we can add rules. Each rule will have a field attached, an alias that could be anything, and a rule, a message, last, true, false, and other options. The rule as well could be one of the core rules provided by the validator, or could be a callable, or could be some function in some place of your application. You just need to configure that. Then, if the validation fails, the message is associated, and the entity, that specific property of the entity is marked as error. Okay, you can access the errors using the errors method at the entity level.
One question before we validate. Sometimes, in some cases, we need to marshal specific fields, for example, daytime picker fields, etc. When we have the campaign,
My fault.
when we have a campaign, and for example, we decide to start end, and we have a date picker, we have to marshal the data before it's validated because it's gonna probably break and didn't get saved. Do you have an example how we marshal correctly? Because I found maybe 1 or 2 examples online, but it was at first place very hard to understand at which place I'm gonna edit or optimize the data before it gets validated.
Okay, so the answer was, so the question was, I need to do some tweaks on the data that is getting in before I marshal it. So there is a place for it, that is the before marshal callback. At the table level, there is a callback specifically designed for that. The callback is before marshal, it triggers right before the data is being marshaled. Okay, the name is appropriate. So if you need to do things on the form and the data array that is going to be marshaled, you can do it there. So the marshaller will pick the result of that callback. So if you need to do little tweaks like building a period from 2 date times or things like that that you are going to expect later at marshal time, you can do it in the before marshal callback and prepare the array so the marshaller just pick it. Or if you need to remove something or whatever you need to do on the data array, you can just do it there and prepare a new data array that is going to be marshaled. Questions?
Is before marshal equivalent to before save in Cake2?
So the question was if the before marshal replaces the before save. The answer is no. We have a before marshal and we have a before save. And both are different because in the before marshal, you are dealing with arrays that are coming from a form or coming from somewhere. And you are generating an entity object that is kind of the output of the marshaller is an entity object or several. In the case of the before save, you already have an entity and you are going to persist the entity in a database or somewhere else.
So if I want to create a select from a name field, I have to do it in the before marshal or in the before save?
In the before save, makes sense for me. Before marshal is to adjust data that is coming from a form that is not what the marshaller expects. But I am expecting, for example, in this case, you're generating a new property that is going to be saved on the database on save. That is this log. In this case, for example, if you're generating this log using the name and the created time and using some kind of permalink or whatever you're deciding to do, makes sense for me to do it in the before save operation. Because this is something that I am expecting for saving the entity. It is at the entity level. It is not before the entity was created. Okay? More questions? No? So let's add a validation rule for the status of the campaign. Sorry, I mixed those two words. We have a campaign status, and we want to validate that could be either new, in progress, or completed. We're going to use one core validation rule that is in list, so you can go ahead and write the validation rule for it. Okay? I'll give you 10 seconds before I start the validation. Anyone does not know where to start writing this validation rule? So we can think about where should be placed our... Everybody knows they should go to the table, right? Yes, should go to the table. Here we have a validation default, and we want to add a new rule for the status field. And we need to guarantee the status could be new, in progress, or completed. So we could do this in list status. New. Progress. Or complete. And we could add additionally a message saying
The rules should table constraints
whatever. And I think I created a constant for it.
Yeah, that's what it just passed.
Yeah, I did it as a constant. But so let's do it as a constant. I create a constant here, like this, and then like that. For the error message, I use this. That is also a way to show you this. It's pretty too big. So I'm using here the in-list rule. I'm gonna check the status value is one of these, and also the message I'm going to generate is invalid status, please one of the following options. I'm using double underscore to translate, or to use a translation for this key in case of exists, and use this placeholder to put the first variable. The first variable is going to use the text class that is one of the CakePHP utilities. Inside the text class, there is one function to list that will pick an array and convert it to a list of things with a default and at the end. We change the and for or, so we can generate a nicely displayed list at the end. Okay. So now if we save this and go to here, campaigns, so define. Oh. Yep. Okay, so if I try to edit this and I say something like this, I'll get a nice validation error like this one. Yep.
A little point, we had the discussion here, if we would use on the flash messages or the translations the domain operator, because when we are in plugin environments, there's maybe a better...
You are absolutely right. Thank you for the hint. The question was why using the default domain when translating some text inside a plugin, and makes total sense to use the $_d instead of the regular $_. So we can keep the translations of the plugin in a separate file and distribute that file with the plugin itself.
Yeah.
So we're mixing the translation inside the plugin with the regular application. This is bad, obviously, and thank you for pointing that out. It's a little bit more complex than I was planning to, but it makes totally sense to add a context here newsletter and use that. Okay, a domain for it. Well, getText has a lot of possibilities. If you are in the mood, you can just go to the PHP documentation and read it. There is a big chapter there to define how the things are pluralized or complex translations, things like that.
Sorry, one question. This is not case insensitive, meaning if, for example, someone would say completed, but with a capital C, or I don't know, all capitals, would it fail?
Yes, the question is if the validation in list it checks for capital letters. The answer is yes. It will check for capital letters. It will allow you only to put exactly what is in the list. If you need to do that, you can write your own custom validation and ignore capitalization. Yeah. Okay. Questions about this? is a pretty simple validation rule. Just play a bit with the validation itself. And now we're gonna write another validation rule that is not so simple. It is written in a different way, so you can see the differences when using a callable for creating a validation rule, and also a conditional validation rule applied. So what if we want to validate campaigns this way? We will be able to set status to in progress only on work days. So if it is Saturday, we cannot set a campaign as in progress because of reasons. Okay. Then we can create a validation rule that is using a conditional validation this way. I'm gonna copy the rule here and put it there for the status. Well, nobody told me, but obviously this rule here makes no sense at all. We have a list, so having not empty is silly, right? Okay, so we are adding a new rule for the status field with some alias, whatever. The rule is a callable function. We'll get value and context by default, and we'll return the value is not in progress only if today is Saturday or Sunday. Let me word this. So we have an on property in the validation rule that will be executed first. This function here will be executed first. If this function returns true, we will check this rule. If that function returns false, we will not. So Saturday or Sunday, we need to have a value different than in progress, because if we cannot set in progress on Saturdays. Okay. Maybe it's a tricky way to express that condition, but it's my way. I'm sorry. Do you? Maybe it's a better place to express that so that it can be understood better. But I try to use a callable as a rule and a callable as a non, so you can see options you could do to define complex validation only in specific circumstances on the application. Okay. Make sense for you? And the same here, obviously. Yeah.
Should in progress be taken out of the message there, so that it doesn't get translated along with the rest of it? So put a
This?
curly brace 0, curly brace, and then
Yeah, I agree.
So that it stays constant.
I agree. Yeah. The question was if in progress should be taken out. So we have in progress as an atomic translation or word translation separated. I would say yes, because obviously we're going to use it in several places. So it's good to get the variable thing out of the message. So the translator just translates one sentence for the error, and then the different statuses in another place. So you can mix both. And you don't need to imagine that you have 3 or 4 other conditions, like campaigns can only be set as new in weekends, things like that. The translation does not need to translate all that stuff, just 2 or 3 things. They usually charge per word, so it's good to. Yeah, questions?
Not a question, a general question. when we use time, we have to define it as namespace in the head. Of the
Yeah,
file.
I already did.
You already did.
Yeah, but the magic of the IDE, I just out imported this class. It is there on top. You're right. Yes.
And he had also a very interesting fact that how does Cake deal with time zones? When we find data, it uses the server or UTC.
Well, when dealing with time zones is always funny.
Because when you find something Saturday evening, maybe your Saturday evening is already past.
Yeah, totally. And thank you for the question. It's a totally valid question because we are now using the server time, but the server could be in whatever other time zone. And their weekend is not my weekend. Why I cannot create this campaign if it is Friday, 10 p.m. So yeah, we don't want to please our clients. So we need to, this time call should be adjusted by the user's time zone. In this case, if we want to have an application that runs across different time zones, we're using the default defined time zone that I think it was UTC for this application. But obviously, this is not going to match what the client is expecting. So all the time objects or all the time class, they have a way to also add the time zone of the client, so the time gets adjusted in this case. Okay. So for example, the users could have a column that says time zone that you can define as a user. I am in GMT +1, for example. I can go to my profile and say GMT +1. So there we could read the user that is currently logged in, get the time zone, and pass the time zone to all the things we do related to times. So every time you do time now, you will get the server time, and you will adjust that time with the time zone of the user. You can do that globally. You can do that global. How?
How and where to do that globally for a given user? Yeah.
Okay. So how? You could do it. We could do it two ways. The first way would be like a global configuration of the time zone. For example, when the user is logged in, you have a before filter somewhere that checks the field or the column and applies that configuration to all the time zones in the application. This is done using this class. Use time. Locator. I need to check that. Do you remember where is that? I will check it.
What are you looking for?
Defining a default time zone for the whole application, the static method.
You can only do that for the ingress of data. That is in apps.php.
Yeah. So then we need to do it here on the time now, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's easy, but it's sometimes hard.
There it is.
It's in string. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry that I couldn't do it.
Is this what you were looking for?
No, setting it up globally for using the whole application after the user has logged in.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
this is down here.
On the request, every request.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this here? Jose, you mean here in app?
Yeah, maybe
Maybe it's
if
bootstrap
you have
rather.
an old template, but if it's not there, just go to bootstrap.php.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there is
Bootstrap. Okay.
a init set INTL, or no, the default time. Just look for
ILTN, yeah. Mm. No.
No, INI.
Ah.
Go again. No, it's 3 lines up. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, there it is. This is for the whole application. If you need to change that, you can.
But yeah, that only changes creating dates and
Yeah.
how you save them, but not how you output them. There's nothing right now for outputting.
Okay.
It's actually a pull request created by Jonas here in the room.
Then I was missing, yeah. Then I was mixing that with the currency possibly, or some other number formats that
Yeah.
can be applied to everything.
Yeah, but to answer your question, what I do, the problem is that time zone is very specific to your business or to your organization. For example, we do this kind of stuff with newsletters, but people creating the newsletters only work in Copenhagen. So I assume that people is in Copenhagen, so I have in the controller from Copenhagen time to UTC. And that solves that for me. But if you have an application where you have no idea where in the world the person is going to create it, then you need more specific rules for ingressing the date and for also doing the output. If you want automatic output, what I do is I create a custom helper. Actually, for me, it's a global function, which is to users time zone, where you read the config and output the data.
Okay. So the answer suggested by Jose was creating a global or a helper to translate server time to the user specific time zone and use it everywhere. Would be cool to have the other thing, but
We'll get there.
But okay.
pull request welcome. Any other questions? Yes?
Another question about validating primary keys. When, well, assuming we use the typical integer unsigned 11 auto increment as a primary key, which validation rules should be set on ID? Because I always see that there is allow empty ID create, but I personally expect that it is required to be empty in creating an entity. So I usually set require empty and require presence on edit.
Yeah. So the question was, why is not required for an ID to be empty when you are validating for a new entity to be created, right?
Yeah, well, which are best practices to validate input data? I'm not sure what I do.
Well, I would assume as well that if there is an empty ID, if there is an autonumeric ID that is generated by the database, when you are creating a new entity, it should be empty as well.
To require empty on create is fine.
Yeah. You also don't want to try and predetermine auto-increment primary keys because Postgres and SQL Server won't let you do it. So if you're trying to guess what the next auto-increment ID is, you'll run into like crazy concurrency issues. And SQL Server and Postgres will just be like, get out, you can't determine sequence values, and they'll just yell, Oracle will do the same thing. The only database that lets you predetermine auto-increments is SQLite and MySQL, because they don't actually use sequences, they have some sort of weird shenanigans in it. So, yeah, I would just make sure, like, I wouldn't even let users specify primary keys if they're auto-increments, like, just don't even let them decide what it is.
Either way, so require empty is fine.
Yeah, I wouldn't even whitelist it as a mutable value.
Okay. So the suggestion was, don't let the users enter IDs because the database engine will generate the ID by itself by mysterious ways, and we don't need to let the user add an ID anyways.
So let's deal with the accessible portal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Your specific question was related with this.
Already.
Instead of allow empty, you want to be empty. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so it is time for. It is time. Okay, it is time. We
One
we
last
have
question.
Megan. Can you come in and explain that?
Sure. Oh, I'll just do it from here. Lunch is downstairs in the restaurant. This gets you in. If you don't have one yet, please find me because I know there are two of you that need to do that too. And then just a heads up, we need to be back in the room at Hoppers 1 to continue then with Jose's workshop. Tonight, after the workshop at about Hoppers 6, 7, we're going to meet back in the room for a games night. I have some really cool games. Well, maybe cool.
I think they're cool.
And we'll organize dinner and that. So, okay, so that's everything. If you need this, let me know. If you need a better seating arrangement or plugs or anything, just give me a shout.
Plugs would be great.
Cool. Thank you. So break.